Hi, we're Group 16 and today we'll be presenting for you our research project. Our project aims to investigate the impact the catastrophic tsunami of 2004 had on the tourism industry in Southeast Asia. A bit of background to the general tourism industry in Southeast Asia sees the destination as a popular tourist attraction. As home to a plethora of desirable locations such as Indonesia, Singapore and Thailand, it is attractive due to its features of rainforests and beaches. Tourism is a long-established economic activity in Southeast Asia, though mass tourism is a relatively recent phenomenon that largely began in the 1970s. The industry grew slowly for decades, but prior to the 2000s, Southeast Asia was experiencing one of the most rapid growths in regional tourism arrivals in the world, seeing a steady rise in tourist numbers, and the destination began to solidify itself as a competitor in the global tourism market. However, at the start of a new century saw the tourism industry in Southeast Asia suffer from the impact of several disasters. The financial crisis, the Bali bombings, and the 2004 tsunami changed the face of tourism within the region. Our team has chosen to further research the impact of the 2004 tsunami due to the disaster not only having a physical impact, but a significant economic impact on Southeast Asia tourism. I will now hand over to Emma to further discuss the event.
On the 26th of December 2004, at 7:59 a.m., there was one of the world's largest earthquakes ever recorded on the coast of Indonesia. The earthquake was 9.1 in magnitude, which triggered a devastating tsunami which affected countless communities around the Indian Ocean. This disaster killed 228,000 people, with many people displaced, including 20,000 children in Thailand. The death toll includes tourists who had gone on holiday over the Christmas period. This death toll makes this one of the deadliest natural disasters in history. The earthquake ruptured a 900-mile area along the Indian and Australian plates. The earthquake lasted 10 minutes and had released the equivalent amount of power as multiple atomic bombs. The waves created from this were recorded to have reached 20 to 30 meters in height. Some of the places hit by the tsunami were Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India. There were several hours between the earthquake and the tsunami, but with inadequate systems in place, many of the victims were caught off guard when the tsunami hit. Furthermore, due to the power of the tsunami, some victims died 8 hours after it first hit due to waves and swelling seas that caught swimmers off guard in South Africa, which was 5,000 miles away from the earthquake's epicenter. I'll now pass on to Craig to talk about the short-term impacts of the tsunami.
The mass loss of life was not the only source of mourning for the countries affected. It was estimated over 2 million people were left homeless due to the damages caused by the tsunami. Those made homeless received immediate emergency aid as water purification tablets, medical supplies, and temporary housing was provided by international countries and charitable organisations. Analysis concluded various mangrove swamps aided in slowing down the wave, meaning that damages inland were reduced in some form compared to coastlines. In these coastal areas, all buildings that were not constructed mainly by concrete were completely destroyed, reducing homes, businesses, and hotels to rubble. Furthermore, transport facilities were compromised, such as bridges, roads, and major ports, resulting in further implications when relief efforts were taking place. As well as homes being destroyed, many people's livelihoods were altered due to the damages. In Sri Lanka in particular, it is estimated at the time of the tsunami, roughly 250,000 people were employed within the fishing industry. However, with the wave destroying 66% of fishing fleets and industrial infrastructure, this led to further economic impacts, which Ronnie and Noor will now take you through.
Moving into the long-term impacts that the tsunami had on the region, due to damages, people wanted to move into refugee camps, and a good amount of people were moving into these refugee camps that caused a lot of overcrowding, which led to a spread of different diseases like pneumonia, and also due to the damages of these sewer systems within the entire region, that led to another spread of many different diseases like malaria and HIV. And there's also many water spots that led to growth in mosquitoes. That also led to a different spread of diseases. So overall, the long-term effects of that meant more spread of diseases, more people dying, higher death toll, and that's kind of, no one really wanted that or wants that even. But economically, the fishing industries were damaged, either the operations or the boats were sunken. And that was a big part of their economy overall. And so that really put a dent into their economy that they needed to recover from, which was also very hard too. But overall, the total economic cost damage was estimated to be $9.4 billion US. And in Aichi, the cost of damage was $4.5 billion US. And that was almost equal to its GDP in the previous year. So overall, as you can see, the tsunami caused very hard damages, either socially and economically, and it was very hard for them to recover.
So as my teammates mentioned, it is obvious that the effects of a natural disaster, particularly a tsunami, is incredibly devastating. So how do we recover? In this particular situation, right after the wave hit, there was an influx of aid coming from all around the world, which was amazing. But unfortunately, there wasn't much planning that went into it. Obviously, no one expected these waves to hit. And so the country wasn't equipped to distribute the resources in the best way and also to relay information. So you found a lot of organizations and people donating a surplus of the same items, right? So everyone assumed this is what the people need, when in reality, there were a lot of other items that just weren't being distributed. Another issue with the lack of regulation of aid can also have an effect on the economy, right? Due to a possibility of exchange rate appreciation, and of course, some adverse effects on a nation's traded goods. If they're accepting goods, to help alleviate the stress of buying certain foods, you can't accept goods that are already produced in your country because it has the potential to destroy markets that already exist, further damaging the fragile economy. Another issue we saw in this particular case was the refusal to accept environmental regulations, right? We saw lots of the tourism industry hit, and it was because they were not listening to some of the environmental regulations, right? For example, lots of coral reef was destroyed in mangrove forests. There were lots of homes that were literally built directly on the shoreline, right? And so what that did is it sort of got rid of the buffer between the people and the impact of these waves, because the mangrove trees and the coral reef both would have helped with that. When it comes to the recovery process, there are three things that a nation focuses on initially, right? It's the emergency. What is the most important thing that we need to figure out? Dealing with the people, the survivors who didn't survive. Afterwards, we focus on rehabilitation of basic life. So nothing too fancy. We're not worried about the tourism industry. We're not worried about hotels, but it's housing and food. And lastly, it's the rebuilding process. And we're going to talk a bit more about that on the last slide. So of course, it's important to note the difference between a rich nation versus a poor nation. Of course, a richer nation has more of an advantage, and pre-existing factors of a nation do play a role in the recovery process. However, though money is an advantage, planning and preparation is essential, and no nation should be counted out because of their financial situation, right? When thinking of the economy, it is important to focus on the idea of managing resources that a nation already has, even though those resources may be scarce, right? Rather than being discouraged by the lack of resources to begin with. These resources should be managed through policy that is created long before a disaster, that is thoroughly planned out, which will then lead to faster development. Research shows that outside of the first advantage, which is money, after that, the next important and most essential thing when it comes to recovery after a natural disaster is planning. And everyone can plan, though planning will look different due to a country's budget, right? And so that means we're going to pre-plan distribution. We are going to have points of contact when it comes to distributing resources within the nations. And we are going to figure out ways, how do we communicate to these amazing charitable organizations who want to serve our people in the best and most efficient way. This also means that we're going to implement our environmental regulations, right? They're not just going to be on the books, but rather in practice. And this will mean creating incentives, because no one is just going to listen to these rules and regulations. And of course, a country should also be open to innovation, right? We need to start looking at things a bit differently, especially when we have less resources than other parts of the world. And hopefully with these tips, a country will be more equipped at recovering from natural disasters as soon as possible. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and here are our resources.